all about motivating our teams, even from afar. This is an incredibly important topic because it is challenging enough to get the hearts and minds of everybody in our business focused on one thing, even if everybody's present in the building at the same time. Now, with remote teams, it's even more challenging. And who better to speak on this incredibly complex and important topic than Kate Turner, the author of Create Motivation, who spent years honing this area as a speciality. Kate, over to you.
Fabulous, thank you. And when you say years in that way, it makes me feel like 103, but that's fine. It has been a long time. So, and I'm finally claiming that that area of expertise. I've been around it for 20 odd years. So I guess I do hopefully know some stuff I can share with you today. And it's my absolute pleasure too. If you've not done it already, do change your settings so that you can chat with all panelists and attendees, because it would be great to see some chat going on there. And I'm going to be using the chat as we go because there's a few questions. I want to keep this interactive. I want to get some thoughts from you. I don't want to just be talking at a reflection of myself in the screen, which is what I'm doing at the moment. In terms of today, what you can expect, well, first of all, it wouldn't be Thoughts on Thursday without some special offers at the end, so please do stay through to the end. If you like what I'm talking about, if it's making you think about how you can measure and put language to your motivation and what you can do for your team, and you want to chat about it further, if you stay through to the end and complete the questionnaire, you can have a chat with us. It would be great to. So it'd be good to see many of you on a live chat at a later date. What we are going to cover today is obviously all about motivation and how you can basically keep your team motivated. That's the broad subject, but also start distinguishing that. I think there's an awful lot out there about what the broad generalizations are about motivation, but actually motivation isn't broad brush, it is individual. And I very much think that even when you're working with a team, what's team? There isn't a team, there isn't a thing, a body really that makes it, that is a team. It's the individuals that make it up. So you've got to find ways to hold that space as a manager for the motivation of the individuals within the team, and then the team benefits. So we're going to be talking about individual motivation that benefits the team and indeed the organisation. We're going to be talking about actually how you also make a distinction between needs and wants, particularly at this time. Might feel luxurious to talk about what you want. It's more about meeting your needs, and there's quite a lot of play going on between those things probably in yourself. So I want to make some distinctions, as I say, to help you for yourself first, but then help your team understand what that's all about. And then I'm actually going to take the last two questions together because what you can do to maintain and actually maybe improve the well-being of your team and get them to be productive is a very much lined up with my thinking about how you can engage and re-engage people, whether they've been just out of the office, out of work in terms of having a holiday, or whether it's furlough or something else. So in terms of re-engaging in a virtual place, how do you do that? So I'm going to take some of that together. And we want to do all of that without putting more pressure, more strain, more effort on you as the team leader, team manager, boss of the organisation, whatever you might be. We want you to do it without burning out. That's very much my philosophy, and I'll be sharing more about that. And I guess that starts with thinking about leadership. Many of you I know joined the call that I did back in April, and I talked a lot about leadership then, but I want to bring that in today because I want to demonstrate this point about this is not all falling on your shoulders. The last thing that you need is something else where you just need to dig deep and push through, and another thing on the list for you to do. So what we're looking at here is the recognition that for me, leadership is actually something that is distributed. It's amongst everybody that we work in. Everybody is a leader, everybody. When they have the daily practice, when they actually are deliberate in taking responsibility for themselves, when they show up fully and they continue to grow and make a commitment to growth, recognizing that none of us are the finished product, but they also create the environment for others to do the same. And the relevance of this around motivation is specifically that point, that it's not about you figuring out what motivates your team or the individuals within it and making them do it, because you can't do that. It's actually providing the environment so that they can deliberately take responsibility for their motivation and work out their needs and wants and how they can get them met. That's my philosophy on both motivation and leadership as a whole. And I hope that puts at mind this sort of, or arrests this thought that it's extra work to do. So it really requires all of us to step up, but in a way that harnesses our motivation, that actually it's a joy to be having these conversations and creating this space that I so regularly talk about. I wanted to start, I've always thought that the terms remote working and virtual teams and even working from home at this time are a bit odd, if I'm honest. And maybe I'm just being a bit pedantic, but if you look up what the definition of remote is, you get things like far removed, unconnected, marginal, detached. Is it no wonder that if we call people remote workers, that we're telling our brain they are apart from us, they are separate to us? And so there's something about that terminology that I guess we need to start challenging, because this is going to become the new normal. So that's the first one. But also that idea of virtual teams, I know where it comes from, I get that. But actually, you know, virtual, I've always been amused because one of my team first joined us as a virtual assistant. And I'm like, but I meet her and she's real. And it makes you think, well, if you call your team a virtual team, does it send a message that actually somehow you're not as connected, you're not real? So I just want to challenge that language. You might want to start calling it something different. And then I was amused the other day, I was, I don't know, it's been a real challenge working from home over the last few months for many people. Even if they've enjoyed it, it can be a challenge. And I liked what somebody said to me the other day, which is, I'm not working from home, I'm actually I'm at home trying to work, which I thought was really good, because actually some of us aren't working from home in the way that a lot of the studies would have done reports around, 6+ months ago. We're working from home in a very different way. So I just want to put that out there, some thoughts to maybe rethink how you're referring to your team, so that you're not putting a self-fulfilling prophecy out there. If you've got any thoughts on that, obviously put them in the chat. In terms of actually how people are feeling about working in this different way and not being in the workplace, it seems that a lot of people, 60% of people, like this environment and wish to continue. I don't know whether, for those of you that have got, maybe you were part of a big organisation, very much everybody working in a place of work, you're having to really rethink now and catch up with your policies, procedures, everything else, to think about how are you going to enable people to work from anywhere, not just home, work from anywhere, have that sort of the digital nomad that it sometimes gets described as. So I think it's important to be thinking about this is not something just to take you through into the next few months. This is actually, how is it reshaping your business? I quite often talk to my clients about how the pendulum has swung. We've had this bluntly ridiculous idea that in order for you to have a job with a certain company that is headquartered, let's say in London, you need to live in London. So if you've got amazing skills in York, for example, and in order for you to really contribute to that company, there was a mindset that you needed to either be physically in that location to contribute, either by working there or to keep getting on that train to get to London. What's that about? And then separately, that whole idea of 9 to 5 is being challenged as well. So there's a whole load of things that we can start to recognize that is being thrown up, and that pendulum is swinging about what is work for us. what is work for us? Who do we, how do we best work? Where do we give of ourselves best? And I was talking to a client the other day, and they said, just in this happening of more people working away from the main office space, they've suddenly realised, as if it should be a surprise to them, but they were saying it, in a way of, I can't believe I've not seen this before, just how much they'd cut off their talent options by, in a way, either unconsciously or sometimes very consciously thinking, well, they won't be able to do the job because they're not based in that area. So all of this is great, because it actually means that in finding good ways for people to be motivated in wherever they work, you actually open up your opportunity to bring in more talent. So I'd love to know, there has been a real mix, obviously, of what's happening in the economy based on people's spending, etc. But there's been a report by McKinsey recently where they found that there was a particular trend amongst 60% of their companies about productivity and sales effectiveness particularly, which gone up a huge figure, 29%, because of the way that they were now selling it. It meant they were doing things differently. In the chat, can you just give me an indication? So in a minute, not now, if you think that in your sector, productivity and sales have gone up, put a 1. And if you think it's gone down, put a 2. During the last 6 months. So if productivity and sales have gone up, a 1, and if it's gone down, a 2. Just give me a bit of an indication by just tapping in 1 or 2 so that we can see what's happening. So real mixture coming through at the moment. I would say that is, actually that's pretty even at the moment, pretty even. And it's about, actually, I think ones that are going up might win it. I do think people are being more productive. I think that my general sense is that whilst it's been challenging, there's been a lot happening to make it, I was going to use the word easier, possible to be more productive. And some of that comes from what we're going to talk about today. How that's translating into income, profitability, etc., we shall see. But there's something about, this is not all doom and gloom by a long stretch. This is something that actually we can harness and we can do something with. That point I made earlier about this word virtual and remote and what have you, and I think we hear a lot about it, and there's a sense of we're humans, we need to be in contact with each other. Of course, that's true. But as I was doing some research, the word virtual distance and the studies around it, and this one from Dr. Lejeski, is very important. It talks about it being a real thing, virtual distance, that sense of emotion and psychological detachment that builds up when you become over-reliant on technology, which is what's been happening. So this isn't a recent study, this is going back for a little while now. What they found out, unsurprisingly, is that the greater the virtual distance, the bigger the negative impact on some really key indicators. So I would, again, love you to use the chat function to let me know, in terms of those things like innovation, effectiveness, trust, work satisfaction, role and goal clarity, and project success. Give me a sense of the negative impact in terms of scale, so 0 to 100. What sort of impact do you think that high virtual distance could have on these sorts of numbers? So, do you think it's a sort of 5% difference, a 50% difference? Just give me some numbers in that that space there, because I'd love to see what you think. So we've got a 50, a 10, a 60 coming through. What sort of amount of impact do you think it has where there is high virtual distance? This is not working from home has an impact. It's when you have that psychological and emotional outcome of having over-relied on technology and not done something positive about it in order to overcome it. So we're seeing plus 50%, 10, 15, 25. Great numbers. And it's such a range, isn't it? I think I was thinking in the less than 50%. And these stats are off their website. So I've sort of borrowed it from there. And I'd really suggest you go and have a look around their website. I couldn't believe these numbers, actually. On first reading, 93, 90, 70% impact. And of course, we don't know what we mean by high virtual distance, but it's that sense that this really matters across all of those different factors. So this is important. This is an important thing. And what I'm going to share with you today is how you can certainly very much limit those issues that would cause virtual distance, but also how you can very specifically do it through the motivation and leadership lens, actually, so they combine so beautifully. So, and that's a very good point, actually. So just looking at the chat there, it depends what you're used to. I guess what we're talking about here is when you've allowed, without having the right interventions and mindset and training in place, you've developed this thing which is causing the psychological and emotional impact that results in you virtually distancing yourself from others. And those who are used to working internationally, as you quite rightly say, Angie, are probably less likely than more immune to it, or those who have been very nomadic anyway. But it's a thing that can happen to all of us, let's face it. What we also know is that that video conferencing is that the fact that we can actually see people, and have that interaction almost in real time. Sometimes it stutters, doesn't it? Still, but the fact we can see people's eyes, see their body language, which we rely on, as we know, such a high proportion on those physical cues, it does mean we feel more connected. And so it's great to see that, that absolutely the majority of people know and feel that video conferencing works. But I would say, please don't over rely on it. I was chatting to a client the other day and they were saying, people have forgotten how to pick up the phone. It's just that sometimes people don't want to actually be seen on camera for that brief phone call because they're actually doing something else, but they're happy to have a phone call, and it can become a block. So do mix your media. I think that's important as well. So going to the basics, I have a general philosophy that if you are a good manager before all of this started, you will fare very well through what we're talking about. It's actually just turning up the skill set of what you already do. I would argue that we weren't doing enough of the motivation stuff before, so actually bringing that in will really help you, but the basics will turn them up. They will really secure some good outcomes for you, but it is certainly sorting out those good managers from those poor managers, and the authenticity that is or isn't in place when a manager calls and says, how are you? Is it just something they know they need to do, or is it something they genuinely are interested in? But in order to sort of summarize some of the key findings that are saying that actually what is making the difference, for all of those best practices, what actually is making the difference at the moment around the way that we prioritize certain ways in which we lead. I quite liked this from the King's Fund. And I like it because it's ABC. I like something simple. So the idea of autonomy. So autonomy, being able to make your own decisions, being able to be trusted. That's a really biggie. Being trusted that you will make the best decision you can in the circumstances, rather than that micromanager piece of somebody looking over or asking you to check in. And that is incredibly important. So if you've got trust issues, if you're a manager for whom the idea of your team not being immediately around you because you can't see what they're doing was a problem before, my goodness, you're going to have a problem with that now. But it's actually, that's about you, not them. It is working with yourself first to understand what that lack of trust is about. So autonomy is the first one. Belonging, no surprise, partly to picked up on this, but that sense of needing to connect with people and having a sense of belonging, not just in terms of connection, given the isolation that many people have felt, and actually, the people that live in an environment where they're pretty much by themselves, that isolation they can feel, is the sense of belonging to something. So the organisation. So whilst you might be physically separated, that you belong to a whole. And so there's something about the support, the empathy, the humanity of that. So in the terminology that I would use, there's the support piece of that, the high support. But there's also the challenge, challenging your teams to belong, to work across departments, to reach out, to talk to each other and connect, so that they can build that sense of team, rather than what can happen of everything coming back to the manager. So again, if you're finding that everybody's coming just to you and they could have just gone and had that conversation with somebody else, that sense of team has somewhat diminished or not been built in the first place. And there's something about building the team to start working in that cross departmental, cross team way, interdependent way that is so beneficial. And then the last one is competence. You know, that this isn't just about reminding people of their skills and saying, you know, you've got this, you can do this, you know, you've got transferable skills that work really well here, you can go and take them into this different situation. That's all good, you've got to be doing that anyway. This is also about being able to pause and get the learning from the team. So rather than do in the team and all hands to the pump, which it was in the first few months, that emergency situation, I think, that fueled the adrenaline. It's actually about saying, right, you know, it's giving permission actually to stop and get the learning from the team so that it can then move on from a new place of growth. I think that's so important. So whatever you're doing in your practices as a manager, do just put the lens on the autonomy, the belonging, and the competence thing to make sure that you're really focusing on those above everything else. And when you do that, according to the King's Fund, then this increases productivity and innovation by about 35%, which is an extraordinary number. It really is. To my mind, though, it wouldn't be right if I didn't look at motivation, didn't mention Dan Pink and his work on you know, the surprising truth about what motivates us, which is basically, you know, looking at very much the intrinsic piece. And he talked about the deeper meaning, and, you know, Simon Sinek, and many of you'll be fans of The Power of Why and the Golden Circle that Simon Sinek talks about. For me, you know, that purpose piece needs to be injected here. So I made it a D, ABCD, deeper meaning. So, you know, there's a lot of work at the moment. You'll be hearing, you know, people connecting to something bigger than and getting huge satisfaction from. And certainly in the work that we do and the measurement that we do around motivation, we know that making a difference, doing something that's worthwhile and knowing you contribute is the number one motivator amongst all of our clients. And I think amongst the community that I work within, generally from what I'm seeing. So some great thoughts that are coming in here, you know, in terms of how you're practically doing these things, and the importance of trust as well. Thank you, Giles. It's so important. So I would be interested to know, you know, what's out of those four, if you're just thinking about yourself right now, can you put in the chat for me, what's the most important one for you? What are you seeking most of right now? Is it autonomy? Is it belonging? Is it competence? Is it that deeper meaning? And if you can't choose one, you want to choose a couple, put it in the order that you want to. So A, B, C, D, one or all of those in an order. I'd love to, again, just because I'm curious, I want to know who I'm talking to. What are you thinking is most important for you right now? So already I'm seeing quite a mixture coming through. Quite interesting if you let yourself just look at that mixture that's coming through. And of course, I'm going to be able to look at this chat afterwards, which will give me some sense of what's happening amongst this cohort, certainly. Yeah, it's interesting to see that deeper meaning's coming up quite a lot, and a real mixture of the other ones as well. Important to know, just make a note of that, so you know that that's what's important to you. And as I said earlier, in general practice, looking at those four, you'll get it right. If you do those four for your team, that will be you on a very good course with your team. And actually, if you also looked at those four and just checked yourself every week to make sure you're getting enough of those four, you'll be in good shape as well. However, my belief, actually I know, is that it goes deeper than that. I will come on to that. So, you know, we could put, you know, if we look at motivation, if I ask a group of people, I'm sure if I'd asked you, you know, what are the motivation models that you know, that we could, you know, reference to make sense of where motivation is coming from, you probably would have mentioned Maslow. So I've got that up here, and we can see those ABCD fit on here quite nicely. It's, you know, this model is great, and actually it is a hierarchy of needs, and we're going to come back to that distinction of needs and wants in a little while. But actually, we don't all stack up the same way. We saw that, some people, D comes first, then B. So deeper meaning, then belonging. For others, it was autonomy, then belonging, then I think it was competence next. So, and also deeper meaning isn't what everybody is seeking. It's not like suddenly if you get it, that it's all about purpose, that somehow you graduate to some sort of new form of human being. That's not what it's about. It is what's important for you. That's the point. For me, Maslow was talking about things from a place of need, and probably we could stack up a lot of things in that way. But when we allowed ourselves to start looking at wants are things that keep driving us forward, that actually we want more and more of them, that if autonomy is important for you, it's not getting just enough autonomy, it's, give me some autonomy and I want some more. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. When we start looking at wants, actually the way that you would stack your pyramid could be very different to the next person. And that's what makes you human. That's what makes you unique. And that's why we can't just use this pyramid as a leader, as a manager, to say, right, if I get the basics right, then I move on to the next one, then I move on to the next one, because that would be far too broad brush. What we need to do is we need to look at it from an individual perspective. And it's worth at this point saying that motivation is something that is a feeling, it's an emotion. It's not something you can see. We often talk about it as energy or electricity even. It's something you can't see until it touches something. And that's really important, because it actually resides in that part of our brain that doesn't have words, because it's a feeling. And so trying to get somebody to articulate what motivates them means it then needs to go through another part of the brain that distorts it, because that does have language. And we already saw earlier about how language can throw us. So sometimes those conversations can be really useful in terms of at least putting motivation on the agenda. But I would also argue that sometimes actually giving people a framework of language might be better than it just coming from themselves, and have some common language in play can be really, really useful. And the way that we do that is, one of the tools that we use is something called Motivational Maps. And this is a fabulous tool. And the reason I want to share it with you is not because necessarily I want you to come and use Motivational Maps. Of course, I'd love you to, but it's actually more because the language is so accessible. So just use the language. You're very welcome to use this language, and recognizing that you've got different groupings of motivator and they mean different things. You can, if you're asking your teams or indeed yourselves, what drives you? What do you want even more of at work? Understanding what drives the individual may mean that you can start attending to that, or they can start attending to that even more beneficially, so you can direct your resources appropriately. For example, if you've got somebody who is highly driven by security, for them, they love processes, they like to know what's going to be happening, they like the predictability of what's going to be around the next corner. Well, clearly right now they might be struggling more than somebody who is, let's say, motivated by spirit, who loves the freedom, the autonomy, the what's next, and doesn't like the same old. So if you're communicating to those people around what's going on in the business, you're going to need to communicate differently to those with high defender, because they're going to need much more regular communication than those with spirit. Likewise, if you're communicating to somebody with high expert, who really likes to know how they're going to get learning and what's the learning opportunities over the next few months when they've seen that perhaps will disappear, how can they get learning from the situation? Well, making them responsible for running those lessons learned sessions that I was talking about earlier, that competence piece can be really useful. So this is language that I'll keep coming back to. Again, just in the chat, how many people have come across motivational maps before? That would help me, again, just position what I'm going to be talking about, and it means I can have a sip of my coffee as well. So who knows motivational maps already? It's got a few, yes, raising of hands, thank you. Yeah, so quite a few do know it, so, and it's new to a number of you as well. Brilliant. Okay, I've got some stuff later so that you can get to know more about it. If it's something that this language really is resonating with you, then these are quick slides. There are resources you can go and find out more. So that's great. What's really interesting is when you start looking at those different motivators, they are asking for different things. So as we said earlier, the defender is looking about how they can be safe. So you can direct your interactions with people to that place, or if it's about, how do I know you'll be there for me? That sense of belonging. And we can see how those ABCD fit into here, but it's much more nuanced. It's much more subtle. And so actually you can have a more granular conversation, a better, more individualistic conversation with the people in your teams. So as I'm going through these, maybe noting which of these, yeah, that's me. I mean, that star one, I know I'll get recognized, isn't the sort of having an impact recognition. It's, I want to know that I'm going to shine. How do you shine when you're, not being seen in the same way? So ask them that question. How can you be seen when you're working in this different way? What would being seen and being recognized mean for you? Turn it back to those who are looking for these things. Share these slides with your team. If it's about Builder, we've got real economic uncertainty at the moment, and people who are driven by Builder are looking at, what's the opportunity? How can I make sure that I get, that new whatever item of choice? I tend to really like having the latest gadgets and latest things. Maybe that they're sort of thinking, how am I going to have that in the future? But actually, maybe the conversation is more about what can you do at this time to really shore up your CV, to really get the experience at this point, how you can really show what impact you're making at this time and how flexible you are, and therefore how versatile and agile you are, that will get you more money in the future. It's those sorts of things. And then within this grouping, if you've got people who are really motivated by innovation, so the creator one, variety, how can you get those people to really harness that motivator of to coming up with new ways of doing things? Because innovation is key, isn't it, to the recovery period that we're going through now. And some people find it really hard doing that within this type of space. But use technology, get them to think about the technology that can be used so that you can really brainstorm effectively. And also mark out sessions that are purely about blue sky thinking. Take it out into the garden. Sitting at the desk where you're normally doing your spreadsheets is not the place to be creative. For me, it would be out in the garden or at the kitchen table. I can do that here. We can't always do it in the workplace, having that opportunity. So there's plenty of thoughts in here about how you can harness those motivations. But I guess my point here is that they're all different. They are all different. So, again, just asking you, what do you think, given those quick definitions that we've got here, what do you think is your top motivator based on those few words that we have? What do you think is your top motivator? I'd love to see what we have in here, and also see whether we've got my prediction on here. I'm not going to spoil it to see. You can have several. So the idea is that, so Elizabeth, to your point, actually you have all 9 motivators. Top 3 is what the report would show you as your key motivators. You'd get all 9, but the top 3 is what we focus on. But all 9 are really important. But I'm just for the sake of ease talking about your top one today. So yeah, I mean, we've got such a mixture. But can you see Searcher? Can you see how much Searcher is coming up? And not surprisingly, we've got Expert coming up. You wouldn't be on a call of this type if you weren't interested to a certain extent in your learning, I guess. But it is, if you're able to look at your top 3, even better. And it's the combination of your motivators that makes you, as I say. So really thinking about that top motivator. This is what drives you. This is what's really important to you. So thank you. And what I've got later will be a resource, so you can start looking, it's just a sample of it on here, of what can you do given people's motivators, what they're driven by, what they really want. What can you do to help people with those motivators to take on bigger challenges, or to work in a virtual environment, or to not leave you once they realise there's a whole other world out there that they could probably go and explore, because they're able to exploit the skills that they've built. So if you'd like that resource, stay to the end and we'll show you how to do that, which would be great. But it lends itself then to this conversation about wants and needs. So far I've mainly been talking about wants, what drives you, what you want more of. And, in deciding what your top motivators are, asking yourself the question of what would good look like when you're having those motivators being nourished on a regular basis. So for me, expert, I love sharing my knowledge, so doing things like this, reading, I've always got my head in a book. I just love it. I absolutely love reading, and textbooks, they're not sort of fiction, they are, and I just love doing that. That's what makes me feel like it's almost a holiday, being able to sit outside and read a textbook. Call me sad, or call me somebody who's feeding their motivators, but that's a want. It can never be met in my mind. However, what we also have going on right now are needs. We particularly now, we always have them. But in normal circumstances, our needs sort of sit underneath, if you like, underneath the surface. And we're not always aware of what they're about, because mostly our needs get met. So we have enough money, maybe. So for me, it would be enough money. I'm not driven, don't tell my clients, I'm not driven by money. For me, I'm purpose-led. But I think I need to have enough money, because if I haven't got enough money, I can't sustain the business. For me, having enough friend, the belonging, so that's important for me, but it can be met. So again, I would encourage you, for yourself, but also for your team, to be thinking about how do you distinguish between those things that you really want versus those things that are things that can be satisfied, because the chances are there will be things bubbling underneath the surface that are causing quite a lot of noise at the moment, that are not being met, they're unmet needs. So, you can look through these again, and, certainly you can listen to the recording again to really take some time to think about which of these are your needs. They feel different. You talk about them differently. Talk it out with somebody else. And once you've found those needs, start thinking about actually how can you have them met at this time. So how can I have enough belonging? How can I have enough money? How can I have, the mother one's enough sense of control, director, versus how can I nourish my sense of learning, my sense of freedom, my sense of making a difference. They're very different. I hope you can feel that energy is quite very different, actually, not quite different, they're very different. So that's the first sort of couple of questions that I wanted to answer, and sort of recognise that this is very much, if you're looking at the team, you're actually looking at individuals, and it's about distinguishing needs and wants, but it's actually about creating some language. And I like the MAPS language. I think it's really accessible. And start having conversations. If you start putting motivation on the agenda, just by doing that, people will know that you are much more human, much more caring and more supportive, and looking at the whole person. And that in itself will drive greater levels of motivation. So what you measure, what you talk about, is what people look at. So I'm hoping that makes sense, but it is only the first two questions. I'm mindful of time, so wanting to move into the next piece. And as I say, I'm going to answer these together, because I'm very keen that, yes, motivation is about well-being. Well-being, thank goodness, is finally being put on the agenda, not because it's a tick box of what organisations should be doing, because actually now, if you don't look after people's well-being, or don't encourage and give people the tools to look after their own well-being, we're all going to suffer. But actually, there is a reason for doing it as well, is that we want to be productive. That's not some sort of mercenary sort of way of looking at it. It's actually saying that if people are productive, if people are actually delivering what they're brilliant at, then that in itself fuels motivation. So you want people to be well enough to be doing the stuff they love, because when they do the stuff they love, funnily enough, they're more productive, and that makes them feel good about themselves. Their self-esteem goes up and they're motivated. So it's a fabulous self-fulfilling cycle. So I've talked about this needing to go back to individuals all stepping up and taking responsibility. So I won't dwell on that, but I need you to know that this is not about you doing this yourself. What I will share, though, is what's at the heart for me of why motivation is so important. And those of you that have already bought the book, thank you. This is the model that it all surrounds itself around. If you look at what productivity and performance is made up of, it is three elements. It is the what, It is the impact, the results, the outcomes of the activities that you do. It is the behaviours and the skills that you engage with in order to deliver on that what. So the what and the how we know about, it's obvious stuff. What we don't do enough of is look at the why bother. Why do I bother behaving in that way? Why do I bother working for this organisation who does this within the world? What does it mean for me? What's in it for me at that base question? So these three elements need to be looked at, because we know if you've just got skill alone, nothing happens. If we've just got outcomes alone, nothing happens. You've just got motivation alone, nothing happens. It's the combination where the magic really works. And so being able to get hold of each of these three areas is key, and being able to define them and know what they will look like for you is really important. But if you're able to look at each of those three and have conversations about each of those three at the individual level, and then start thinking, well, how does that align then to the organisation? So how does what I do align to the organisation? How does the behaviours that I exhibit relate to the organisation? Suddenly we start having a strategic impact and a really measurable dynamic impact actually on how we do things. And for me, that's where we build cultures. When we're working in similar ways in terms of our how, that's how we build culture. It's how we build engagement, because we all know why we're working for this organisation. And it's certainly where we build talent. So there is, if you have responsibility for any of those three areas, do come talk to us, because we absolutely get how motivation gives you a completely different view on these three, I think, to what's been done for a number of years. I'd love to share that with you. I love those conversations, so come and have a conversation. So in terms of how you re-engage with the team, the practical steps of this is, first of all, number one in that the why bother space is talk to people about how they're doing. How is their motivation? You wouldn't ask it directly in that way, but you certainly would ask, how have things been going for you? How's it been feeling? Remember, motivation is a feeling. How are you? Genuinely, how are you? And then when they've answered that from their what they feel they ought to say, ask it again, but how are you really? Get to understand them and calibrate with them, and share a bit about yourself, so that you can show that vulnerability, which opens up. It's contagious, isn't it? It means other people start opening up. Even better, open a conversation about, motivation is clearly really important right now. Let's talk about what you love doing at work, what you want to be doing more of at work, and what opportunities you've not had recently that would really fuel your motivations. Let's share some language around this. So do that first. Secondly, then look at the how. The how, remember, is skills and behaviour. So if you start talking to people and asking people, what are the skills and the behaviours that they think are their absolute sweet spot, that they really love using, and that they perhaps built actually over this time. There's plenty of organisations that we know of and have worked with who've actually put much more learning into place over the last few months to keep their teams busy. So what are they learning? But also, what are they learning at this strange time? So it's about being able to get people to own and build their self-esteem around their sense of self and what they bring, the talents they bring. So this is a way of building them up, or high support, for those of you who know that model. And then lastly, it's the checking in on the what. So, what maybe have they achieved over recent times? What do they want to? What results, impact seem important for them right now? So that you can start getting them to align these three areas. It's a lovely conversation. It certainly would lend itself well to any sort of one-to-one check-in. But the important thing is, did you notice I started with the motivation piece? Because you need to calibrate to where they are. And it's a very building conversation. It builds up from them and it makes them feel good. You then go to the organisational level. So you could do this within the team, actually. You could have a call with the whole team, or you can do it one-to-one with an individual. But what you're wanting to do here is you're wanting to share with them where the organization is at. So they've got something to orientate themselves to. You know, they know where they are now, but where are they orientating themselves to? And this is about, you know, why the organization is doing what it's doing. What is its purpose, maybe, if you're able to articulate that, but why it's making the decisions that it is, why it's prioritizing what it is. Being able to start in that place is so key, and we don't often see it. If there's ever a time where the world of working with purpose and profit was going to emerge, it's now, because that purpose piece, that sense of deeper meaning that I talked about earlier, is absolutely critical. So if you're doing this as a business, you're going to be ahead of the pack. Start with the why bother, then go to actually talking about why this organization is different, you know, and what you're doing here is you're looking at the unique contribution that comes about because of the skills and behavior your organization has. There are plenty of pharmaceutical companies out there. There are loads of charities working in the same part of the sector that you're in. There are loads of engineering businesses doing precision engineering in exactly the same place that you're in. I'm sure there are somewhere in the UK, if not the world. So, you know, you're not unique, but you're unique because of the skills and behaviors that you have. So being able to remind people, particularly if they are motivated by this, of what the contribution this organization is able to make because of the people it has, is really important. And then talking about the culture piece, you know, why we're different, you know, what is it about our culture? You know, is it about being results driven? Is it about being purpose led? Is it about being very community minded, whatever? That's important, because that culture piece will be influenced by that. And it obviously links back to the motivation piece. But all of this then comes to outcomes. What outcomes, what impact, what results does the organisation want to drive forwards? And by having that articulated really clearly, it gives people, as I say, the opportunity to orientate their way around this, to make sure they know exactly how they sit within that wider context. You know, do I fit here? And if people start saying, oh, I don't think I fit here anymore, you know, you're going off into, I was working with a charity some years ago, and they'd been a service organisation where they had a massive, you know, 2,000 odd staff who were engaged with providing services for their organisation, and then they decided to become a campaigning organisation. They recognised they were going to have a much bigger impact in their sector by being campaigning rather than, if you like, also doing the services bits. They sold off that services piece, and it made such a huge difference, because it meant that they were really focused on the purpose. But of course, it left an awful lot of people behind as well, thinking, well, you know, if you're in the shared services piece, well, I used to work for this sort of organisation, now I work for that bit, I don't fit in. Well, that might be the case, in which case go with. Or it might be, actually, if you're about search, you can make even more of a difference here. If you're about defender, you know, look at the new processes and structure and stability you can bring to this organisation to bring really good campaigning around. So it's not that you don't fit, it's asking how you fit. Because again, to my mind, often it is just recalibrating your thinking to know that actually you absolutely have a place here, or you know why you don't, and you leave really well. I don't think we should shy away from that. So going back, if you're having a conversation, you've done the individual piece, you've talked about the organisational piece and getting people excited about what the organisation is doing, or at least being realistic about where the organisation is. And then you can start focusing in on team. And we've run plenty of sessions this way, so we know that it works, whereby you get the team really thinking and sharing their individual why. Remember, you might have had an individual conversation with somebody about their motivations and put some language in play, but they've not shared it necessarily with anybody else in the team. So this is the opportunity for people to go, oh yeah, I'm really driven by belonging as well. Or for me, you know, actually, I know we need to be connected, but I love the autonomy that I get from this situation. Being able to have those conversations makes us understand our difference. You know, in the same way as so many people will have done behavioural psychometrics such as insights discovery and Myers-Briggs, which I love and use all the time. we don't look enough at the motivation lens. So put some language around that, give the space on a call at least to discussing, you know, what's driving this team? Are we all driving in the same direction? Or are we driving in different directions? And how exciting is that in terms of our motivators? But how do we then come in together to deliver on the same thing? So first of all, look at the why bother? Then go and look at the behaviors and really start exploring in the team, you know, what are the behaviors that work already within the team, what we're really good at, what we're known for, those sorts of things. But then start asking, what do we want to be known for? You know, what are the behaviors that are going to make the absolute difference to deliver in this organization? So that can mean looking at the culture piece of the organization and saying, okay, they're now focusing on being results driven, for example. How can we be even more results driven in the way we run meetings, in the way that we write reports, in the way we engage with our suppliers, whatever it might be? Because it's in those little changes that we approach those normal tasks that we bring cultural change about. So getting the team really thinking about how we can start demonstrating those behaviours that support the culture, but also, you know, what are our brilliant skills that we contribute to the organisation? How do we make sure that they're used really effectively? Actually, how can they be used outside of the organisation as well? And then getting the team to really focus in on, okay, so if the organisation is needing us to deliver this impact, results and outcome, what's our part of that? What are we going to do individually to deliver on that, which I think so key. So in terms of this as an exercise, it probably sounds, you know, there's a lot to cover, but it is just, she says, it is just looking at motivation, the why bother, the how, the skills and the behaviour, the what. Then it's going back around that at an organisation level and then honing it back in at the team level. I hope that's you know, giving you some ideas of what you can do with your team, and certainly people coming back into the team who haven't been around for whatever reason for a while, or just feel disengaged for some reason. You know, why wouldn't people, to a certain extent, you know, to some level? How can you really breathe new life into your team? Well, I'd argue is by harnessing motivation, getting really clear on the behaviours you want people to exhibit, and totally owning the outcomes you want people to have, and having accountability around those outcomes as well. And I guess, you know, I said at the beginning of this, for me, this combination, these three aspects of the why bother, the how and the what, they've worked for us for years. You know, we know as an organisation that in working with our clients in this way, it delivers, you know, that can-do attitude, that commitment, that resilience, that enthusiasm in a human level. So people feel so much better. They are more engaged with what they do at work. And we know that when people love what they do it so much better. But that has an organisational and societal impact as well. And that's why I wanted to share this slide, because when you start in normal times seeing these sorts of levels of impact by harnessing motivation, my goodness, what's the opportunity right now by bringing motivation into your team? And it starts with a conversation. It starts by actually being willing to open up and have that dialogue. So before I sort of close and bring my thoughts together on where to start, really, I wanted to share this beautiful picture with you. I love Alien. And I was talking, actually, I think Julia Carter from Zephyr is on the call. Julia's a complete expert in working with virtual teams, and we have very similar thinking about a number of things. I was chatting to her earlier, and we were just saying about, you know, we kind of need a mental reset. She's very recently been on holiday and so has experienced this firsthand. And it just made me think about, you know, we've kind of coped our way through for a long time. And if we're not careful, if we don't have a reset, we will just keep coping. What we need is a way, actually is here, hi, thank you. What we need is a reset, and reset, what better way to have a reset than actually to have a break, to have a holiday, whatever that might be. So it might be like me, just, taking a few days out, which I'm going to be doing next week, to actually do what I want to do, when, effectively switching off my part of the business for a while, because, I can do that, and it will be fine, because you know what, I'm nourishing me, I'm feeding my motivators, and I'm attending to my needs. And in doing that, I absolutely believe I will come back reset, and knowing that what comes next I'm ready for, not because I'm having to cope with it, but because I'm harnessing my motivation. So I'd really invite you that, even if you're not thinking of taking a whole week out or whatever, I mean, normal times we'd be taking a couple of weeks, wouldn't we? Taking a day or two or more, if you can, to just nourish your motivators, those top threes. So very basic summary, because I'm sure you'll all be picking up your own ways of where you want to go with this. Please start with yourself. It is absolutely important, imperative really, that you start with yourself. How are you doing? How are you harnessing your motivation? How are you challenging your own perceptions around trust? How are you making sure you take a holiday? And then calibrate to your team. Start having conversations around where they're at, and start there. It's very easy to sort of be that motivating leader that's out in front, say, hey, it'll be fine, let's go. Yeah, there's a place for that, but there's also a place about really truly understanding and having empathy with where each individual member of your team currently is at, and giving them the permission to be them, but also giving them the respect that they can step up and through this. So enable and create that context for them, hold the space for them. And I would say doing that through the lens of motivation. Talk about it, give it a language, measure it, maximize it, because when you do that, it will just impact on how you have conversations, and it will change the way that you lead. I would align the team. I think that exercise that I went through with you very briefly is a fab way of being able to get people back in alignment, a bit like the chiropractor that gets you back in alignment. Sometimes we need to hear a few cracks and be pulled in different directions to realize that actually we've been walking wrong for a while. And, so align the team. And the last thing I'd say is, your team's been through a tough time. So if you catch yourself and other people in your team doing it right, it's from that place of strength and what people are doing that's really effective that you'll get greatest growth. So in terms of, I just want to offer you a few things, and we'll get into a couple of questions, hopefully. I noticed yesterday my book's on £2.99 on Kindle at the moment. It was higher than that the other day. So go and grab that. It doesn't hardly cost you a penny, but there are some free resources. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That was quite exciting. Amazon do their own thing about prices. Secondly, if you want that free copy of the global pandemic, let us know. And if you want to know more about Motivational Maps, then James Sale's book, The Creator, we've got loads of copies of that. We use it within our accreditations all of the time. I'd be delighted to send that to you for less than half price. Again, just let us know in the feedback sheet. And then lastly, if you really are interested in looking at Motivational Map seriously, as I know many of you have done on this call, then we're putting a bit of an offer out there to get a motivational map done and get some online learning, and if we've got a few people wanting to do that, we can do an online session for you as well. I think it'll be really beneficial for you. And last but not least, book a call with us. Any of the panelists are very happy to have half an hour free call, no sale, just want to engage with you because you hear enough from us. We'd love to hear from you. So with that in mind, and I'll put this slide up just to remind you of next week's ones, I'd love some questions. Love some questions. So Bob, come and tell me if we've got any questions.
We've had a question come in on the chat already. Can you give me a practical idea on how to do the ABC you spoke about earlier? Okay, so that was the autonomy, belonging, competence bit. Thank you. So it's things like, for example, actually, one that catches a lot of this is, in the old days, we used to do sort of ground rules. You go to a meeting and you'd spend that first sort of 10 minutes painfully going through a ground rule session, all knowing that it's going to be switch your mobile phones off and all that jazz. Actually, that team charter, that ground rule setting is a formality that would work really well with this. And actually talking about, in levels of autonomy,
what do we want in that? So, how are decisions going to be made, and how are we going to keep in touch in sense of the belonging piece, and when are we going to have lessons learned sessions, and what form are they going to be? So actually having a team charter to check in on those things is a really good sort of catch-all for all of those. And then also I would say that, make use of technology. It used to be probably that you'd use meetings to report in on how projects are doing, which kind of happens a bit with lots of people taking individual notes. But actually let's learn a lot from the project management world, and just use what's freely available. I think Monday.com, Trello, there's a whole bunch of them, of project resources that are so great and give you a sense of connection because you're all seeing who's doing what, but it also gives you a sense of accountability. And if you're being accountable, you can actually go and do your own stuff because you can be autonomous in delivering it. So there's a couple of tips that just to quickly share with you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I usually love those ground rule sessions, so thank you for reminding me of them. We've had another question come in on the chat. What ideas do you have on alternative language if you don't like virtual and remote?
Oh, good question. I'm not sure. I think I've put it out there more as a sort of like, hang on a minute, aren't we all just exacerbating this? Isn't it becoming self-fulfilling? I think we're just working. Does it matter where you're working from? You're in. I was even thinking yesterday, in or out the office, but that's like, are you in the team, not in the team? So I don't know if it's more of a sense of actually going back to that. I'd probably say to the team, how do we want to refer to this? Rather than calling it virtual and remote, actually, what words do we want to use? Because you'll have different ones in different organisations that make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like some people like virtually remote.
They do.
Well.
I can, Angie. I can see you like them, and maybe it's my issue. Maybe I need to get over this. It's just, I just thought it's funny when I looked up the definitions. I thought, oh yeah, disconnected too.
Right, we'll squeeze in one more question because we're actually at 12 o'clock. So we're moving from summer to autumn. How do you predict it's going to change things that you've been talking about in terms of motivation and focus?
Yeah, Julia and I were having this conversation this morning, actually, fun enough. And I think it's a really relevant one. I think, and I know Julia was saying this as well, that we're in a bit of a false situation at the moment. I think that we've had months of bluntly quite decent weather, getting used to a situation, and we don't know what's ahead. And I think we can either brace ourselves for a challenge, or we can say, actually, the next few months are a different way of us working together. And this is a great opportunity to put out there some really good management practices and get all of our leadership to step up, so that we can not just get through the next few months, but actually start working differently. So I think we do need a break. I wonder what September's going to feel like. I know for September, for me, is often the excitement. I can smell it in the air. That slight coolness in the morning of thinking, oh, it's a new term, isn't it exciting? And I don't know how it's going to feel for many people. So thinking about that, and not just seeing what it turns out like, but proactively getting ready for it and being in a place of positivity and knowing your team so that you can work with this positively together, rather than what we've had to do recently, which is just respond and react. I think we can actually start to be a bit more opportunistic, I would say, that in the way that we see this as a way of stepping into a new way of working, which I am actually excited about, despite all the difficulties. And I know it's hard. I also think this is a new way of working for all of us, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, there's change coming, and I know change is exciting for some of us and scary for lots of us too. Yeah. Kate, it's been wonderful as ever. Thank you for your contribution. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you, guys and girls. Next week is Ken Kais, but the time is different because he's piping in from Canada, so he couldn't get up at stupid o'clock. We're doing a 2 p.m. till 3 p.m. next week. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for attending. Please fill in the survey so that we can give you those free resources. Thanks, Kate. Goodbye,
Lovely, Jeff.
everybody.